here goes. Everyone remembers from previous Rosh Hashanah that the last of the sounds of the shofar is a tekiah, and the minhag, the custom, the practice. Well, we have to figure out exactly the status of this longer elongation of the last tekiah is. We begin with it back in the days of the Gaonim, Rav Fink. He was one of the great Rosh Yeshiva in Babylonia after the close of the Gemara. And this is a tshuva which he wrote on exactly this question. They asked him exactly this issue. Well, I don't know what to do about that. Okay, Shevach is the host. I don't know if I'm not the host anymore. What can I do about it? No, I cannot share because I'm not the host.
You're muted.
Yeah.
You're muted. We couldn't hear you.
I am the culprit that I pressed button, but I don't know how to. I don't know
if you click on participants,
yes,
and then you click on, I guess it's the other shevach, and then there might be a more button. You might have the option to make them a host.
Wait a sec. I have shevach host me, and then another shevach.
Yeah,
so
click
which one
on
do I click?
The other shevach.
Which one? The second one.
The one that doesn't say me.
Okay, that's the second one. Yeah.
And then click on it and see if there's a more button on the side.
There's 3 little dots.
Yeah.
Mute. Yeah.
What options do you have?
Make co-host, make host, co-host.
That's
make
fine.
Host. Okay.
Or host. Either one.
Co-host. Okay.
Yeah, either one.
Okay. Do you want to make Shevach the co-host? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Ani mitzta'eret.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, I'm glad we have at least one Zoom guru amongst us. Send your bill at the end of the month to the yeshiva, and I'm sure you'll be paid promptly.
This class is well enough, well worth it.
Okay, they asked Rav Fink, the great rabbi of Babylonia, the following question: Inyan shofar shel Rosh Hashanah ki min hagaonim lahatria achar siyum tefillah trua gedola. The last sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is elongated, a trua gedola, and they do it kidei l'arbev es hasoten. They want to do it so as to confuse the Satan, so that the Satan will not be able to say bad things about Am Yisrael in the Bet Din of Shamayim. V'chein minhag b'shtei yeshivot, and that's the custom in the 2 great yeshivot of Babylonia, Sura and Pumbedita, were the 2 great yeshivot in Bavel in those days. And that's what they did. Now, there's several things that have to be understood about this question. First of all, everyone knows that tekiah is a single long tone. Da, that's tekiah. Teruah, on the other hand, is a broken sound. Oh, and the elongation in the 2 yeshivas in Babylonia was not the tekiah. Rather, they elongated the last trua. Apparently, that was the minhag in Bavel, in the 2 yeshivas, and they asked Rav Fink, what's going on here? Why do we do this? And Rav Fink wrote an answer, and this is his answer. Anu ra'inu lashivchem. We see fit to respond to you. I guess he didn't answer all the questions that he was asked. Unlike me, I always answer every question that anyone asks me. Well, he didn't bother. Ki ein anu osim kein b'toras minhag. This is not a minhag. Now, this is quite a remarkable statement if you think about it for a moment. Practices, things we do, divide into not two categories, halacha and minhag. Rather, things we do divide into three categories. Some things we do because it's halacha. Some things we do because it's a minhag. Some things we do because we do them. It's not a halacha and it's not a minhag. It's just something people do. That's all. And that's what the elongation of the trua is. It's not a minhag. Surely not halacha, not minat Torah, not midrabanan, not even a minhag. It's just something people do. Lo shamanu she'avotenu nahagu ken. And this is not a traditional practice in the yeshivas of Babylonia. This is a recent development. He wrote this in the 10th century. This is a recent development. Back in the days of the Gemara, people weren't doing this. At least we never heard of anyone. It's not written in the Gemara anywhere. And you remember the Gaonim in Babylonia, the great Rosh Yeshiva in Babylonia, they were the direct descendants of the great rabbis of the Gemara. And one of the many reasons that they are so important for us is they had oral traditions. Their teachers were still alive in the days when the Gemara was being composed, and therefore the Gaonim heard many things from their teachers from the days of the Gemara, which are not actually written in the Gemara. Well, this is a case where Rav Hai Gaon heard nothing about this tradition, nothing about this minhag. It's just something people do, that's all. Ella, Yechidim mitaskim, kol echad ve'achad betavato. What is this elongation of the lesson? Everyone does whatever they like. Some people like it. Some people like to make a longer trua at the end of the show. Why do they do that? Why are they doing it? Mod Amru, it says in the Gemara, Ki asa Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef. When Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef went from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, to Babylonia, he said, Ki hava misayem shlicha de tziburet kiosa b'Yavna. He reported in Bavel, he came to Bavel and said, back in Eretz Yisrael, he just come from Eretz Yisrael, back in Eretz Yisrael, in Yavna, which was one of the center of Limud, when the Shliach Tzibur blows the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, lo shama inish kol une, no one could hear anything. The sounds of the shofar in Yavna were so loud that it was deafening, and no one could hear anything else. Every individual person at home, everyone was blowing the shofar simultaneously, and it was so loud it was deafening in the city of Yavna, and you couldn't hear anything else besides the cacophony of the sounds of the shofar. Well, Rav Hai Gaon concludes, we learn from this report of Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef that back in Eretz Yisrael, after the davening was finished and everyone went home, what did they do? What did they do on Rosh Hashanah morning after they finished the davening and went home? What everyone did was the first thing, you pick up your own shofar at home and you start blasting away. And the whole town was full of the sounds of individuals, private people, blowing the shofar privately in their own homes after the davening was finished on Rosh Hashanah morning. There's no obligation to do that. It's not a halacha. Everyone was already yotzei yedei chalva. Everyone had already performed the mitzvah in the in the synagogue when the shofar was blown. Ella mitzvah min amuvcha lahatria achar siyum tefillah. But it's a mitzvah min amuvcha. It's advisable. It's commendable. It's praiseworthy to give an extra trua when you get home. So apparently what they were doing when they went home after they finished shul on Rosh Hashanah morning, everyone would pick up his shofar and that was the sound which was deafening. Not da, but trua and not tkiyah. Why? Kedei la'arbev haSatan. They did it so as to discombobulate, so as to confuse the Satan, so the Satan wouldn't say bad things about Am Yisrael in the heavenly court. That's fine to do. Commendable, praiseworthy, fine. Absolutely no obligation. It's not min Torah. It's not min Rabbanan. It's not even a minhag, where we would say everyone should follow the minhag. It's not even that. It's just something that individuals do because they want to do it. Everyone does whatever he wants. And what they wanted to do was just blow the shofar at home after davening so as to confuse the Satan. V'im eino simkein, someone who does not do this, someone who says there's enough noise in town already, I'm not going to start blowing my shofar when I get home. Doesn't matter. Fine. No one said you have to do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's just something that people do because they want to do it. If you don't want to do it, skip it. Shar Gaonim, Modim, Shitzarich Latri al Kolpanim, aside from Rav Hai Gaon, other Gaonim, other Rasha Yeshiva in Babylonia thought it is some kind of minhag and therefore it should be done. Well, we understand Rav Hai Gaon's position. Rav Hai Gaon says there's no standing to this elongation of the blowing of the shofar. You want to do it, go for it, but it's in no sense obligatory. Other Gaonim in Bavel, said you should do it. It's a minhag. This was already a dispute in Babylonia. Now the Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to see the text of the Shulchan Aruch a little bit later this morning. The text of the Shulchan Aruch copies over the writings of Rav Hai Gaon, and the Shulchan Aruch, we're going to see in a few minutes, says you should have a long tkiyah. One should elongate. One should lengthen the tkiyah. Oh, wrong. The Shulchan Aruch says one should lengthen the trua. And the Taz, in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, when the Shulchan Aruch says trua gedola, the last trua should be lengthened. Kedei la'arbev haSatan. That's the reason. Nearly, it seems to me, the Taz says, Perushe shelo yekatreg alehem achar tefillah. We want to confuse the Satan. We want to keep the Satan occupied, distracted. We want to distract the Satan after the tefillah is finished. Shaholchim v'ochlim v'shosim v'smeichim, because we're going to go home and have a su'udah of simcha for Yom Tov. And while we're going home and we're going to have the su'udah of simcha for Yom Tov, we want to distract the Satan. Lomash Einam Yereim Me'em Asadin. The Satan is going to go to the Bet Din of Shemayim and say, look, the Jews down there are having a good time. They're not taking Rosh Hashanah seriously. They're having a yontiftik meal. Wow. While we are fulfilling the mitzvah of Simcha on Rosh Hashanah, the Su'udah of Simcha on Rosh Hashanah, we want to distract the Satan, and therefore everyone privately in their home in Yavne. It was so loud, everyone blowing their shofarot at home, you couldn't hear anything else. Okay, what we know up till this point is that there are two opinions amongst the Gaonim in Bavel and Babylonia. Rav Hai Gaon, no standing at all. to elongation of the trua. And you notice we've not yet said anything about lengthening the tekiah, ta, as the final note of trua. I haven't touched it at all, but the last trua should be elongated. And what he's talking about is not the last trua, which is part of the regular blowing of the shofar in the synagogue. He's talking about extra blowing the shofar that people do at home in order to distract the sultan. And that is just long blasts of the tekiah, of the trua. Now, let's go from the period of the Gaonim after the close of the Gemara in Bavel. Let's go down into the late Rishonim and see what they have to say about this. We're going more or less chronologically here. The Tur writes as follows. Katav Rav Amram. Rav Amram was another one of those Gaonim, another one of those Rosh Yeshiva in Babylonia. And Rav Amram wrote, La'achar hatfila Miri'im trua gedola, below tkiya, kedei la'arbe v'sasotin. When the davening is finished and everyone is ready to go home, or on the way home, or already at home, that's the time when individuals take up their shofar and blow the trua. Rav Haigon said, Lo b'toras minhag anu osim. We don't do it because there's any obligation. We do it because people like to do it. So the Tur has not helped us at all decide which opinion to embrace. The opinion of Rav Haigon, according to whom you want to do it, do it. It's just something that people want to do. Or the opinion of the other Gaonim, that it's a legitimate minhag, and therefore everyone should follow the minhag. Torah does nothing to help us decide which opinion to embrace, which is a little bit disappointing because one of the the primary reason why the Torah was written was to decide which opinion to follow where there is a controversy, where there's a controversy. But occasionally, as in the case before us, the Torah did not decide. The Torah just brings both opinions. Well, let's go further in time to the Bach. Rav Yoel Sirkis was his name. The name is not well known in yeshiva circles, but the Sefer is very influential. You talk about the opinion of Rav Yoel Sirkis. Not many people in yeshiva will know who you are talking about, but talk about the opinion of the Bach, the Sefer he wrote. Oh, that's a heavyweight. The Bach wrote as follows. Perush lo metoras minhag anu osim. What did Rav Haigon mean when he said that the lengthening of the sounds of the shofar is of no standing? What did he mean when he said it's not a halacha and not a minhag? Kidei shenomad kevan shenahagu kein hakol vadai minhag avosenu Torah. It's something which is a legitimate minhag. We say minhag is like Torah. Of course, you cannot violate minhagim. Of course, you have to conform to minhagim. We don't say that regarding the longer sound of the shofar. Imkein yeshikuv b'davar. If it would be a minhag, then it's something which you would be required to do, and you'd have to stop everything else until you do it. Kagonim ta'ah yachazor l'rosh. For example, if it were a real minhag, like all the other Gaonim hold, what if you make a mistake? There are all kinds of dinim, a ton of details about blowing the shofar, how long the tekiah has to be, the tone of the shvarim, the relative lengths of the different sounds. There are a lot of halachas to learn. Well, what if you make a mistake and blow an incorrect long trua? Well, You don't have to repeat it. No one said you have to do it the first time. And therefore, since it's not really a minhag, there's no need to repeat. Elamechi, also Rav Yitzchak, the story of Rav Yitzchak traveling from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia and reporting in Babylonia what he had heard in Yavna, that everyone is blowing the shofar at home after the davening. He couldn't hear anything else because of the noise. That was a private matter of individuals. In order for a minhag to be a minhag, it must be a communal minhag. And things which everyone is doing privately in his or her own home, well, maybe everyone's doing the same thing in the privacy or in the privacy of his or her own home, maybe, but that doesn't make a minhag because it's all private. In order for a minhag to be a minhag, it has to be a communal, public practice. Of course, he's talking about minhag hamakom. There are two kinds of minhagim. There's minhag hamakom, which obligates everyone in the town. Even just visitors passing through are obligated to conform to minhag hamakom. But then there's the other kind of minhag, which is a private matter, which is not the private minhagim are really a subcategory of nidarim, of vows. A vow, a neder, is well, everyone knows there's 613 commandments. We're not allowed to add any commandments. We're not allowed to subtract any commandments. The obligations of the Torah are what the obligations of the Torah are, and there's no way to create new ones except by means of a neder. The Torah grants you the authority to create your own private, personal Torah obligations by making a neder, by making a vow. If you make a neder, if you make a vow not to eat apples, not to smoke certain leaves, whatever vow you make, you create for yourself a new Torah law. That's a private, personal thing, having to do only with you. Communal minhagim have nothing to do with individuals creating a vow. And in order for a communal minhag to be a minhag, it has to be a public communal matter. Just because everyone privately is doing it at home, well, it could be that all those individuals made private, personal vows to blow the shofar at home. Who knows what they did? Well, whatever they did, they should fulfill their vows. If they made such a vow, that would be a personal issue for them. Lefichach, imei nosim kain, ein ikuv b'davar, someone who does not lengthen the sound of the shofar. Well, just continue to go about your business. There's no failure here if you fail, if you don't do it. Nira da'afla machmirim, even according to those who are strict, like the other Gaonim, and think there is some kind of minhag here that everyone should conform to. Well, they think it has to do with the 100 cries of Sisera's mother. Sisera is one of the stories that his mother cried 100 times when he was when the tent peg went into his skull and killed him. And therefore one should cry 100 times on Rosh Hashanah. That means there should be 100 blasts of the shofar. In shul, they do 30 before Musaf, 30 during Musaf, a few extra for Kaddish afterwards, well, in order to mashlim, in order to complete the count, to crying 100 times, so the Mahmirim say that's the reason people are blowing the shofar an additional time in order to complete the count of 100. Ein zechiyuv, but there's no obligation to do this. Ein ikuv b'davar. Someone who didn't do it can just get about his or her business and forget about it. You don't have to go back and do this. Bottom line, the Bach has taught us that although there's a lot of talk about elongating, lengthening one of the tones of the shofar, it's really not of any halachic standing. Now let's see what the Shulchan Aruch actually says about this. Here's the text of the Shulchan Aruch. La'achar tefillah, after davening, miri'im trua gedola. We have an extra long trua, not a tekiah, da, but a trua, ta 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 ta, and a long one. Below tekiah, no accompanying tekiah, just one long trua is added at the very end. Up to this point, no one has spoken about a long tekiah. Even in the Shulchan Aruch, in the grand scale of things, historically, is not so long ago, or at the beginning of the 16th century. That's not so long ago in the scale of halachic history. Still, no mention of a long tekiah, only long trua. Mishnah Brura, just 100 years ago, Ein anu nohagim kain. We don't follow the Shulchan Aruch. I can't count the number of times people have told me that if you're a Torah true Jew, you have to do what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. Well, I hope we can agree that the Mishnah Brura was a Torah true Jew. He did not think you have to do what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. In fact, what could be clearer? Ein anu nohagim kain. We don't do what the Shulchan Aruch says to do. Rak b'siyum tekiah acharona shel hashlamat mea kolot. What we do is the final tekiah at the end of the normal seder of blowing the shofar. The final tekiah, hamakri omer, the person who is coaching the Baal Tokeah, right? The Baal Tokeah holds the shofar in his hand. Someone coaches him, instructing him which sound to make next. And the Makri, the one instructing the shofar blower, says, Tekiah Gedola. Normally, the one instructing him, the one coaching him would say, Tekiah, and he'd blow a Tekiah. Trua, and he'd blow a Trua. Shvarim, and he'd blow a Shvarim. The final time, he doesn't say Tekiah. The final time he says Tekiah Gedola. V'tatokea ma'arich ba yoter mishar tekiyas. And the tokeah, the guy blowing the shofar, makes a long one. Da. Well, Mishnah Brura is reporting the common practice in the Ashkenaz synagogues in East Europe 100 years ago, not so long ago, and just very different from what it says in the Shulchan Aruch, very different from what all the previous sources say, from the earliest days of the Gaonim down to his time. Just drop everything, forget about everything we saw in the sources, and instead, what we're doing is a long tekiah, and not an extra tekiah after the blowing of the shofar is finished. It's the last tekiah, which is part of blowing of the shofar. Well, this leaves us wondering, where on earth did this practice of the long tekiah come from? The Mishnah Brura reports that the practice of the long tekiah was in place 100 years ago in Eastern Europe, but is there an earlier source for this? Where did it come from? I spent some time looking around, and I'm quite sure I have succeeded in identifying the earliest source, which talks about this long tekiah. I hope it's going to be later on the page. Yeah, here it is, the Maharil. The Maharil, 14th century, Ashkenaz. I'm quite sure this is the earliest source to talk about lengthening the last tekiah at the very end of the standard seder of blowing the shofar. Amar Mahari Segel, he said as follows: why do we lengthen the last tekiah, which is part of the regular seder of blowing the shofar? We call it tekiah gedola. Why? Everyone should hear this. V'yedu, and then they will know. Shesimu akolot, then they will know that the blowing of the shofar is finished. You're ordinary people out there. Many of whom are uneducated and really don't know exactly what it is they have to hear. You have to hear the shofar, but exactly which tones and exactly which order. A lot of people out there don't know. They do know that they have to remain silent until the blowing of the shofar is finished, because there was a bracha made before blowing the shofar. That bracha has to cover the whole of blowing of the shofar. So people know they have to listen, people know they have to be quiet, but people don't know when it's finished. I have a dear friend who is musically not very musical. A dear friend who's not very musical. Well, not everyone's perfect, I suppose, but I probably have some faults. Not been able to identify any of them yet, but I probably also have some faults. He tells me he doesn't like Baroque music. Can't stand from Vivaldi to Bach. He doesn't like Baroque music, and I say to him, "What's wrong with Baroque music? It's beautiful. What could be more beautiful?" And he says, "You never know when the music. The only way you know that the piece is finished is when the musicians stop playing. When they stop playing, it's done." Well, uh, in in folk music, in more popular music, and later on in the history of music, the composer always makes an effort to indicate to the listener that the piece is concluded. And there are different ways that composers can do this. I'm sure that everyone loves Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. As everything else Beethoven wrote, the Fifth Symphony is just chock full of surprises. A great creative genius, of course, packs the creative work full of surprises, things you were not expecting. Of course, as soon as you hear it, you realize that it's perfect, and no other possibility really makes sense. But it was a great surprise when it was. In any event, listen to the end of Beethoven's symphony and try to put yourself back in the times when it was first composed and first performed. And he ends the symphony with a coda, actually with a double coda. A coda is a way of ending a piece of music and gives you the feeling of completeness, gives you the feeling of finishing. That's an idea that Beethoven invented. Um, whatever the basic tone, whatever the root tone of the scale, every scale has a root tone to it. Melodies almost invariably end on the root tone of the scale. And very typically, it's a very long note. The root note of the scale, elongated, that's a good sign to the listener that the piece is complete. That gives a sense of completion, a sense of coming to the end of the musical composition. According to the Maharil, Lahavdil, Kama Alfei Havdalas, the people have to know when Tkiya Shofar is finished. They're going to start up again pretty soon. It's only the end of the first movement, and they're going to start again in the second movement, or it's really done. That's the purpose of the long Tkiya, so that people will know, the mitzvah is now done. V'yomru, and then they can say Ashrei Ha'am Yodei Trua, which is the introduction to the rest of the prayers. Raya, and the proof for this is in the verse B'mshoch Hayovel Hema Ya'alu Bahar, when the Bnei Yisrael were gathered around Mount Sinai, ready to receive the Aseret Dibros. There was a specific commandment of Hagbalat Hahar. No one was allowed to approach the mountain. Only Moshe Rabbeinu. No one else was allowed to approach. When they heard the blowing of the shofar, that was the sign that the prohibition of approaching the har, approaching the mountain, was lifted. So we learn from this verse in the Torah that the shofar, the blowing of the shofar, can be used to inform the people that the halacha has now come to its end. Back in the days of Matan Torah, that meant the prohibition to approach the mountain is now expired and you can approach the mountain. Nowadays, on Rosh Hashanah, it means that the mitzvah of shofar is finished and we can just now complete the davening and go home. Nimtza shemashiachat kol siman siluk hashchina, hearing the long blast of the shofar, the final Tkiya Gedola, informs you that the Kedusha of Mount Sinai is now lifted, and therefore approach Mount Sinai back in the days of Matan Torah. In modern times, hearing the long sound of the shofar tells you that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is now lifted because we finished performance of the mitzvah. Rashim la'alot lahar. Back then, the people could go approach the mountain, and nowadays it's the same. So this is the Maharil, the origin of the long Tkiya, which is commonly heard in synagogues. Now, of course, there are two sets of blowing of the shofar. One set before Musaf, the other set during Musaf. Min HaTorah, Midarabanan, one can fulfill all of one's obligations with either set of blowing of the shofar. Someone who hears the blowing of the shofar before Musaf and leaves shul and gets sick or whatever, or for whatever reason, you didn't stay for Musaf, you left before Musaf, but you did hear the full set of blowing of the shofar before Musaf. As far as the mitzvah is concerned, you're done. Well, of course, there's a separate mitzvah of Musaf in the synagogue, but if you're sick or something, for whatever reason, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. Therefore, since the Baal Tokeh, since the person blowing the shofar knows, well, depending on the shul, if the person blowing the shofar knows that there are some people in shul who are going to be leaving before Musaf, it would be wise to make the last Tekiah before Musaf a long one. Well, there are some synagogues in which this is done, and that's fine, informing the people. If you're not staying for Musaf, now you've done the mitzvah and you can go home. The time when the long Tekiah is more in place, where it's more proper, is at the end of Musaf, the last of the Tekiyahs which are part of Musaf. Let's go one step further. The Mata Yehuda. This is the 19th century, Eastern Europe. כבר נתבאר שלאחר סיום התפילה נהגו לתקוע עוד להשלים 100 קולות. it's customary after davening to blow some extra tkiyot in order to round up to the number of 100. Now this too, oh, my cynicism is a great weight upon my shoulders. It is so difficult for me to bear the weight of my cynicism, but I must buck up and actually do it. Here's the problem. Some things are obligatory, some things are not. And you have to decide whether or not something is obligatory, a Torah obligation, or a rabbinic obligation. Oh, it's just a nice thing that people want to do. If it's a nice thing that people want to do, it's not exactly obligatory, as praiseworthy as it may be, as commendable as it may be. It's not actually obligatory. And a decision has to be made whether a specific practice is or is not obligatory. Now, one of the many reasons that it's important to make this decision is because of the rule Shomea Ke'oneh. Everyone knows that when you hear Kiddush on Leil Shabbat, or when you hear the shofar in shul, hearing is as good as saying it yourself. You don't have to read Megillat Esther out loud yourself. It's good enough to hear it. Hearing Megillat Esther, Shomea, Ke'oneh, it's as though you're saying it yourself. Same thing with Kiddush on Shabbos, same thing with the shofar. But this rule of Shomea Ke'oneh, this rule that hearing it is as good as saying it, this rule applies to anything which is obligatory. Something which is not obligatory, you have to say, if you want to do it, but do it yourself. um, After all, the underlying foundation of Shomea Ka'ona is, in the words of the Gemara, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, all Jews are mutually responsible for each other. Since Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, all Jews are mutually responsible for each other, I have an obligation to help you fulfill your obligations. And therefore, if I say Kiddush, if I read the Megillah, if I blow the shofar and you hear, well, I'm helping you fulfill your obligations. Jews are mutually obligated to help each other fulfill their obligations. But something which is not obligatory, I have no obligation to do it myself. You have no obligation to do it, and therefore I surely have no obligation to help you do it. And therefore, the rule Mea Ka'ona doesn't work. And therefore, these extra kolot, these extra sounds, which people blow after the davening is finished, are not obligatory. We've seen that over and over again today. They're not obligatory. It's a nice practice which people have. They want to round up to the number of 100 tones. Fine and good, commendable, praiseworthy, but not obligatory. And therefore, anyone who wants to do it is welcome to do it. Go ahead, do it. It's commendable, it's praiseworthy, but you have to do it yourself. You can't expect someone else to do it for you. Shomea Ka'ona only works if something is obligatory. And therefore, what I see with my cynical eyes, what I see after the davening is finished on Rosh Hashanah, the tzaddikim, the mahmirim, the strict Jews gather around the Baal Tokea, gather around the person blowing the shofar. Everyone else, most of the other people got home already, but the ones who want to be strict will gather around the Baal Tokea, who blow extra sounds. According to the Brisker opinion, according to the Hasidic opinion, according to the Taimani opinion, according to the Moroccan opinion. Well, a decision has to be made. If all these extra sounds are in some sense obligatory, when indeed one person can blow the shofar for the others. But then everyone should be required to stay in shul until it's finished if it's obligatory. Since most of the people have already gone home and it's only Yehidei Skula, it's only a few individuals who want to be Machmir who are standing around listening to the extra Tekiyot. How can you fulfill these extra Tekiyot just by listening to them? The rule of Shomea Ka'ona fails. Hearing it is not as good as saying it because there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation. You want to do it? It's commendable. It's praiseworthy. Be strict. Do it, but do it yourself. Wow, my cynicism weighing down upon me. That's these extra sounds to round up to 100. Yesh Misha Katav Shalasof Miriam Trua Gedola Belotkia. We saw all those Gaonim who said that the lengthened sound should be a trua, and not a tkia, da. No, again came. We don't do what those sources say. Oh, this is one of a ton of examples of old minhagim which have fallen by the wayside. The minhag clearly, in earlier days, the days of the Gaonim, through the Middle Ages, at least up until the 14th century, the minhag hapashut, the minhag which had spread out everywhere, was to have an extra long trua on Rosh Hashanah. Well, that just fell by the wayside, and today it's unheard of, but been replaced by a different minhag, a lengthened tkiya. Rak b'siyum atkiya acharona shel hashlomat mea kolot amakri omer tkiya gedola. And unlike the sources, which was talking about an extra long blast of the shofar after the mitzvah was finished, our practice today is totally different. We elongate the last note, which is part of the mitzvah, not an extra note after the mitzvah is finished. Make it a long tkiyah. How much longer? As long as it's a little bit longer than all the other tkiyahs, you're set. We do it so that this to distract the satan, so that when everyone goes home and starts the simcha of the Yom Tov meal, the satan will not make the claim in the Bet Din Shel Ma'ala, the Jews don't take Rosh Hashanah seriously. They're going home and having a good time with a good meal. Furthermore, יש בזה טעם כדי לעורר לבבות בני אדם אחר שרוצים לצאת מבית הכנסת אחר התפילה לביתם. Since everyone is going home from the synagogue, we don't want people to forget the shofar. We want them to keep it in memory, and a long final note will stick in the memory. Tamid yeh shofar lezikaron lahem. They will remember the shofar for the rest of the day, and that instills a sense of yira, that instills a sense of awe for the day of judgment. Al zeh amar ashrei am yodei trua. What did the verse mean when it says the Jewish people are ashrei, blessed, for knowing about the blowing of the shofar? Rotzel omar, this means no nim el libam liot yodim misubav miatrua. That means that when people hear the shofar, it's not only a musical note. Jewish people know that hearing the shofar is to awaken the internal sense of Kedusha. The Jewish people know that hearing the shofar awakens the internal sense of tshuva and devekus b'kodesh baruch hu. Yit oreru lashuv me'averes shebiyadam. The Jewish people know that the sound of the shofar is not only a musical note, it's also something which improves their spirituality by stimulating tshuva. And this will bring about Yirah Shamayim. Let's finish with one more point. Up until this time, what we've seen are all halachic sources, pure halachic sources. Shem Shmuel was one of the great Hasidic writers of the 19th century. He was the son of the Avnei Nezer. He was one of the big names. Family name was Bornstein. Again, not a very well-known name in yeshiva circles, but the Sefer, Shem Shmuel, this is one of the great Hasidic Sfarim, which is widely embraced even outside of Hasidic circles. Let's see what he says as a final note. That's not a good word. Let's see what he says as a final comment on blowing the shofar. Mitzvat shofar hu hevel halev. Blowing the shofar, it's not just the air coming out of your lungs. It's not just hot air. The sound of the shofar comes from an inner spiritual reservoir. Kodem bo'u lehitlakot b'chameshet min motzot hapeh. Your ordinary breath coming from your lungs. Now you compress your diaphragm, the lungs. You push the air out of the lungs. The air goes through your organs of articulation, and you use your organs of articulation. That means your tongue, your lips, your palate. You use your organs of articulation to form sounds, words. You use it to speak. That's not shofar. Shofar is far deeper than that. More shenidreshet tachlit reus deliba terem bol hitlakul chamishas min. The power of shofar is not merely the physical power of air coming out of your lungs. Rather, the shofar is powered by spiritual energy. Kein shekatuv, like it says in the verse, Sa'ak libam el. The shofar represents the crying out of the heart. Yargish omek alev v'lo yediyah machshava levad. The blowing of the shofar creates a deep emotional impression. It's impossible to achieve this deeper spiritual sense without gathering all of your capacities together. The whole person, physical and spiritual, must be involved in blowing of the shofar, or else you're not going to get the full benefit. Kamosha Katava Rambam, and this is what Rambam wrote in a letter that he wrote to one of his Talmidim. The Rambam wrote, Va'ata b'hitaka shofar b'Rosh Hashanah. When you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, yadecha yu pshutot l'lekichat shofar. You stick out your hand to take the shofar in hand, to grab the shofar. Einecha kmutzot, your eyes closed firmly. Oznecha kashuvot, your ears open wide. Yeta chalkecha nir adim, and the rest of you shudders with anticipation. Charedim v'nif'amim, your body throbs. Your whole being is involved with Tkiyah Shofar, combining the spiritual with the physical is the impact which Shofar calls for. Those are the words of the Rambam. Now we understand what the verse meant. Tiku b'chodesh shofar b'kesa. That the verse says, blow the shofar at the time of covering. Well, what does it mean at the time of covering? In most shuls, the minhag is to cover the shofar with a cloth. When it's not actually being blown, the Baal Tokeah takes it from under the cloth, blows it, and puts it right back under the cloth, because it says in the verse, we blow the shofar in the covering. Well, the real meaning, the pshat, the real meaning of the verse is that unlike every other Yom Tov, which occurs in the middle of the Jewish month at full moon, This Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, begins on the first day of the Jewish month, Tishrei, when there's no moon at all. The moon is covered. Tiku b'chodesh shofar b'kesa, you blow the shofar when the moon is covered at the beginning of Tishrei. That's the pshat, the literal meaning of the verse. Hainu, shelo tiyeh tkiya b'chitzonius ha'odam ela b'kesa. But the inner, the deeper meaning of the verse is that the blowing of the shofar is not to be a mere externality like playing a musical instrument. Rather, the blowing of the shofar must be an internal event, a hidden event, internalized within you. Only you sense the impact of the shofar upon yourself. That's a spiritual event. Hainu nikudat livavo mechuseh, your spirituality is hidden within you, and that is the spirituality which the shofar will awaken. So with this, we've surveyed the basic sources regarding the long tkiya. There's only one other point which I'm going to make very briefly because it's of historical interest. Rav Yerucham Fishel Perla was one of the all-time great Talmidei Chachamim, the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. He was a very wealthy businessman who lived a very private life in Europe for 40 years. He hardly left his house. And everyone in town knew that he was a wealthy businessman, but beyond that, nothing was known about him. He never spoke with anyone and basically stayed at home for 40 years. What he was doing for 40 years was writing a commentary on Reb Sadia Gaon's list of mitzvahs. Reb Sadia Gaon wrote a list of the 613 mitzvahs. The list is around a page and a half long. For each mitzvah, 3 or 4 words describing the mitzvah. And for 40 years, Rav Yerucham Fishel Perla was writing a commentary on this. The commentary turns out to be 7 huge volumes, thousands and thousands of pages, in the course of which he surveys everything which had ever been written about each individual mitzvah and goes on for pages and pages of parsing each individual word that the Reb Sadia Gaon used. He used only 3 or 4 words to describe a mitzvah. Each word deserves a few. In any event, as far as shofar is concerned, he points out that when Yehoshua was conquering the city of Yericho, the city of Jericho, it was at the end that they walked around 7 times blowing the shofar. It was the last long blowing of the shofar which accomplished the crumbling of the walls of Yericho, the crumbling of the walls of Jericho. And we learn from this that the final long blast of the shofar is representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's having accepted our tefillot, marching around the city 7 times, davening for destruction of the walls. And the last tekiah, God responds, and the walls fall. We learn from this that the long tekiah represents God's acceptance of our tefillah, and that's why we have a long tekiah on Rosh Hashanah to remind us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is accepting our tefillot and accepting our tshuva and therefore forgiving us. Tov, with this I'm going to pause today. Im Yetz Hashem, next week we'll continue with halachas of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're going to get to Sukkot as well. If you have any specific issues that you want discussed, here's my email on chat. There you have on chat my email. Feel free to send me an email message with specific issues that you want to add to the list of things I'm going to be doing. At this point, are there any questions that you would like to ask now? How do I do this?
Hi, Shalom, Rav Fink. Thank you. I do have a question or two. With some things, you mentioned that things weren't mentioned in the Gemara. Is that because they may not have even known that they might have needed to stay it? Like they might not have known in the future there'd be a question on it?
Maybe. Or maybe they didn't think it was so important. Don't know. Don't know. Don't know. But the Gaonim do report to us a lot of stuff that they heard from their teachers, and their teachers were alive and the actual students of the rabbis of the Gemara. In addition, even in subsequent generations, the Gaonim in Babylonia had their archives. The libraries in the yeshivas of Babylonia had existed since the days of the Mishnah, and there were archival notes that the rabbis in the days of the Gemara left and were still available to the Gaonim in Bavel.
Wow.
Mm.
Do we have any of those?
Well, only the quotations that the actual libraries were all lost in the 17th, no, in the beginning of the 7th century. Those libraries were all destroyed together with the yeshivas.
Yeah, they didn't have a scanner.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that might or might not have helped. After all, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember the days when digital documents were prepared with a word processor called WordMill, Einstein, and I have a ton of documents which cannot be opened anymore.
Oh, wow.
There's no way to open them.
Are they digital files? There's got to be a way. There's no way you're the first.
Yeah, but they're coded. They're coded according to software that no longer exists.
You're saying you have WordMill documents that you'd want to open? I'll see.
Fortunately, I was warned by one of my sons, who's a guru, to RTF them. To RTF them so that they would be openable in the future.
Later on.
But
Wow.
even so, like today everyone is using compatible this, compatible that. But don't be surprised in 20 years if your documents today cannot be opened.
Oh
well, one of the differences, there are many differences between digital books and paper books. One of the differences is that you take a paper book off the shelf in the library, you open it up and you read it. Digital books, if you have the software, then you can open it up.
This is the software. This is the software.
Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned about Shomea Ka'oneh, about Kiddush. So why is the idea of everyone doing Kiddush come up if everyone is Shomea Ka'oneh and everyone is as if they said it themselves? Why is this idea?
This is a Hasidic practice. And regarding this, the Hasidic practice is rooted in a different idea from the non-Hasidic practice. The idea is as follows. The Hasidim say, mitzvah bo yoter mibishlucho. Given a choice of fulfilling a mitzvah yourself or having someone do it for you, it's always better to do it yourself. And therefore, everyone should make Kiddush themselves. The others say, well, berov am hadras hamelech, everyone joining together to do the mitzvah simultaneously, that's hadras hamelech, greater glory to God. And therefore, the more people who are joined together by Shomea Ka'oneh, the more people together, the better it is. Now, of course, neither of these approaches is halachically rooted. After all, mitzvah yoter bo mibishlucho in the Gemara has to do with getting married. It's better for the hatan to put the ring on his kala's finger himself rather than have a shliach do it for him. And really has not a whole lot to do with Kiddush. And berov am hadras hamelech, has to do with reading them in the Gemara, has to do with reading the Megillah for Purim. That's Pirsum Hanes. And of course, Pirsum Hanes is better when more people do it together, but that does not necessarily have anything to do with Kiddush either. So it is a different minhagim, neither of which is really halachically rooted.
Wow. Last question. You mentioned the status of things that people do sometimes aren't minhag, derabanan, or deoraita. How do we identify such a situation? And that's not minhag or halacha. And what do we do about it? What's the status?
Very simple. You just have to learn the makarot. You have to learn the sources. That's all. And then you'll decide.
I was afraid that was the answer.
Okay. When I say that neither of the practices, the Hasidic practice or the non-Hasidic, neither is rooted in halacha, that's a complicated way of saying, well, you should be laid back, mellow, and tolerant of what the other people are doing. Okay.
Thank you.
Shavua tov. Shavua tov.
Thank you so much.
Shavua tov. Miss you, Jenny. You are Rav Fink.
Shalom.
Shalom.